When humans responded to our call for help, the star was dying, and it was our fault. Not our fault for choosing the wrong enemy, or our fault for not seeing what the Vorkai were planning. It was our fault for trusting that the rules of civilized space still applied, that the ancient treaties still meant something, that a weapon capable of destabilizing a living star would never actually be used against a populated system. It was being used right now, against ours. My name is Vel Sar, and I was the 7th-ranking scribe on the Thekori Interstellar Council. My job had always been to record events, not to live through catastrophic ones. But here I sat in the deep communications chamber beneath the council tower, watching the frequency monitors glow with incoming disaster reports, while the senior members argued above me about options we did not have. The Vorkai Dominion had deployed their stellar disruption lance 41 hours ago. It was a machine of terrible patience. It did not need to fire once and be done. It simply pulsed, again and again, at precise intervals, each pulse nudging our star's magnetic fields a fraction further out of balance, like pressing a bruise, slowly, until the bone beneath it broke. Our sun would reach critical instability in approximately 92 hours. Our evacuation capacity could move perhaps 3% of our surface population in that time. The council had already done the calculation. They had done it 3 times, hoping for a different answer. There was none. I remember the moment Councillor Drevathi came down the stairs to where I was sitting. He was the oldest member of the council, and his 4 eyes looked tired in a way that went far beyond sleep. He sat beside me without asking, which he had never done before, and for a long moment, he simply stared at the frequency monitors. "We received the last refusal," he said quietly. I had been tracking the outreach attempts since the crisis began. The Keth Collective was the closest capable species, but they had declared non-involvement after the Vorkai sent them a private diplomatic note, the contents of which we were not permitted to know. The Sul Confederation had voted to intervene, and then reversed the vote within hours, after a second vote, after a third meeting, after a procedural delay, after a recess. The Aldrani had simply not answered. Their silence was its own answer. "There is one more option," Drevathi said. He handed me a data chip. I looked at it. I looked at him. "You cannot be serious," I said. "I am not serious," he admitted, "but I am out of alternatives." The data chip contained a broadcast template for the open band frequencies, low technology, unencrypted, the kind of signal that ancient civilizations used when they first pointed their antennae at the sky and hoped something would hear them. The kind of signal that civilized galactic society had not used in centuries, because civilized galactic society communicated through the layered mesh networks, the encrypted diplomatic channels, the formal hailing protocols. The open band frequencies were, for all practical purposes, the channels that only primitive species still monitored, species that had not yet joined the galactic community, species that were, by the standards of the council members upstairs, not yet fully formed, species like humans. I had read the human files. Everyone in the council had, at some point, because humans were unusual enough to warrant curiosity, even if they were not yet unusual enough to warrant respect. They had discovered faster-than-light travel roughly 300 years ago, which made them extraordinarily young by galactic standards. They came from a single planet, which they had spent most of their history attempting to destroy in various creative ways. They were warm-blooded, soft-skinned, surprisingly fragile in terms of raw biology, and yet their species had a peculiar relationship with danger that no council xenologist had ever been able to explain satisfactorily. They ran toward it. Not all of them, and not always, but with a consistency that defied statistical comfort. When a human encountered a situation that most species would retreat from, a significant portion of them would instead accelerate. Their military history was, frankly, exhausting to read. Their medical history was almost as strange. They had developed an entire class of individuals called emergency responders, whose entire profession was to move rapidly toward whatever was most dangerous in a given area and attempt to fix it. They did this voluntarily. Many of them considered it an honor. The council had classified humans as a species to be monitored, possibly contacted in 50 to 80 years when they were more developed, and otherwise left to their own chaotic evolution. "If we send this," I said, holding the data chip, "and they actually respond, We are inviting a premature species into a conflict that has already destroyed every hope of a conventional resolution. Yes, said Drevathi. And if they respond but are incapable of helping, we will have spent our last hours watching a species of warm-blooded mammals try very hard and fail. Also yes. I turned the chip over in my fingers. Outside, through the thick walls of the communications chamber, I could not hear anything. But I knew that above us, the sky was already beginning to shift color at the poles. The star's instability was creating magnetic interference. In another 30 hours, we would see it with the naked eye. And if we do not send it, I said, then in 92 hours, approximately 97% of our surface population will die. Drevathi was quiet for a moment. That is the calculation, he said. I inserted the chip and began encoding the signal. I did not simply send a distress call. I encoded everything: the coordinates of our system, the nature of the threat, the technical specifications of the Vorkai stellar disruption lance, every detail our sensor arrays had been able to capture, the firing intervals, the pulse frequency, the power signature. I was not sure why I included the weapon data, perhaps because I was a scribe, and scribes recorded everything. Perhaps because some part of me thought that if anyone could do anything with raw technical information, humans could. They were, by most assessments, remarkably good at taking things apart. The signal went out at the 473rd standard hour of the crisis. I did not expect a reply. I had sent the signal because there was nothing else to send, and because Drevathi had asked, and because the alternative was to sit in the communications chamber and watch the frequency monitors and count down the hours. At least encoding the signal had given my hands something to do. I began organizing the evacuation priority files. Children first, then the elderly, then essential knowledge carriers. The library archives were already being compressed into data crystals for deep space burial. If our people could not survive, perhaps our history could. Perhaps in 1,000 years, someone would find the crystals and know that the Thekori had existed, and had been good people, mostly, and had been destroyed not through any fault of their own but simply because they had lived in a corner of the galaxy that a powerful and careless empire had decided it wanted. 14 minutes after the signal went out, the comm array lit up. I stared at it. I counted the minutes again in my head. 14. The nearest human outpost on any of our charts was nearly 6 light hours away. A signal could not travel that distance and return in 14 minutes. It was not physically possible. And yet the array was lit. I opened the channel with hands that I noticed with distant professional interest were not entirely steady. The voice that came through was human, female, and calm in a way that felt like a decision rather than a natural state, like someone who had chosen to be calm the way you choose to wear a coat. This is Admiral Nora OCI, of the United Human Fleet, calling the Thekori Council. We received your signal. We are coming. Do not attempt to negotiate with the Vorkai. Keep your civilian population below your atmospheric shielding layers. Conserve your power grid for life support and thermal regulation. Our estimated arrival is 31 hours from this transmission. Please send us everything you have on the weapon's firing signature, including any residual energy readings from previous pulses. We will need the full data set. Thank you for reaching out. A pause. Also, please tell your council not to worry. We have seen worse. The channel closed. I sat in the communications chamber for a very long time without moving. Then I climbed the stairs to where the council was still arguing, and I stood in the doorway until they noticed me, and I said, in the most steady voice I could manage, "The humans answered." The chamber went completely silent. "They answered," I said again, "and they said they are coming." No one in the council chamber spoke for several seconds. Councillor Drevathi was the first to find his voice, and even then it came out smaller than usual, as if the news had compressed something in his chest. "They answered," he repeated, not a question, just the words, spoken again, because saying them once had apparently not been enough to make them real. 14 minutes after we sent the signal, I said. 14 minutes. There was a ripple of movement around the chamber. Councillor Peth Mail, who managed our military affairs and had the distinguished record of never once having managed an actual military engagement, pulled up his data screen and immediately began checking distances. I watched his 4 fingers move across the interface with increasing speed, and I watched the expression on his face shift from skepticism to confusion to something that looked almost like embarrassment. "That is not possible," he said. "The nearest registered human installation is nearly 6 light hours from our system. A signal sent and received in 14 minutes would require—" "They were already closer," I said. "Why would they be closer?" I did not have an answer for that. None of us did then. What I did have was the full text of Admiral Osei's message, which I read aloud to the council twice, and the fact of the signal's metadata, which I displayed on the main chamber screen. The transmission had not come from one source. It had come from 17 different vessel registries, all sending simultaneously, all time-stamped within microseconds of each other. 17 ships, at minimum. Possibly more, if some had been broadcasting through others. Councillor Lethvar, who handled diplomacy and therefore spent most of his time being cautious about everything, leaned forward in his chair. "What do we know about human military capacity? Actual capacity. Not historical records, not theoretical projections. What do we actually know about what they can field today?" The honest answer was, not very much. Our last formal intelligence assessment of human military assets had been conducted 11 years ago. At that time, humans had maintained a fleet of roughly 300 vessels of varying size and armament, organized into what they called the United Human Fleet. Their technology was, by galactic standards, approximately 60 years behind the median for spacefaring civilizations of their age. They had not yet developed the layered shielding systems that most of us considered standard. Their propulsion methods were functional but not elegant. Their weapons were, according to our assessors, powerful in a blunt and somewhat alarming way, the kind of weapons that suggested a species still working out the question of how much force was too much. 11 years was a long time. In human terms, it was roughly half a generation of technological development. Humans developed technology the way their ancient legends described their weather: fast, unpredictably, and often with consequences that surprised even them. "We do not know what they have now," I admitted. "We know what they had 11 years ago." "And 11 years ago, could they have stopped the Vorkai?" Silence. The answer was almost certainly no. Even now, with whatever developments they had made in the intervening years, the idea of a 300-year-old spacefaring species stopping a weapon deployed by one of the most powerful empires in this region of the galaxy was, mathematically, deeply unlikely. But they had answered in 14 minutes, and they had said they were coming. I returned to the communications chamber and sent the full weapon data. Every sensor reading, every recorded pulse, every frequency measurement our arrays had managed to capture. Admiral Osei had asked for it, and I had learned, in the hours since her message arrived, to take seriously the things humans asked for. There was usually a reason, even when the reason was not immediately visible. While I waited, I did what scribes do. I read. I pulled every document in our archive that mentioned humans: the official intelligence assessments, the xenological studies, the cultural analyses, the trade negotiation records, brief and unremarkable, since humans had not yet built enough commerce to make them significant trading partners, the occasional first-hand accounts from Thekori travelers who had visited human space and come back with observations ranging from admiring to deeply unsettled. One account, written by a trade ambassador named Ven Sori about 60 years prior, stuck in my mind. She had spent 3 months on a human station called Callisto Point, and she had written her report in a tone of permanent mild bewilderment. She described humans as creatures of enormous emotional range, capable of great laughter and equally great sorrow, often within the same hour, often about the same thing. She noted that they formed attachments with startling speed, and defended those attachments with startling ferocity. She described watching a human male sprint across a docking bay to push a child out of the path of a malfunctioning cargo loader, an action that had resulted in significant injury to himself, and noted that when she asked him afterward why he had done it, he had looked at her with what she described as genuine puzzlement, as if the question itself made no sense. "Because she was about to get hurt," he had said. Ven Sori had written, at the bottom of her report, "I do not think humans calculate before they act in the way that we do. I think they feel something first, and the feeling moves them before the calculation has time to arrive. This could be a significant weakness. I am not yet certain it is not also a significant strength." I thought about that for a long time. I also thought about the weapon data I had just sent. I had included a detail that our senior weapons analyst, Keth Prahl, had noted in his secondary report but not included in the primary assessment, because he considered it speculative. The stellar disruption lance operated on a resonant frequency that was, in theory, vulnerable to interference if you could introduce a sufficiently powerful counterpulse at precisely the right interval between firing cycles. The window was narrow, approximately 4 seconds wide, once every 47 minutes. Hitting that window would require either an extraordinarily precise weapon system or an absurd amount of luck. I had included Keth Prahl's secondary report in the data packet, all of it. 18 hours after Admiral Osei's first message, a second transmission arrived. Velsar, this is Osei again. We've analyzed the weapon data. Your secondary analyst found something important. We're going to need confirmation on the resonance window. Can you get us a real-time reading on the next 3 firing cycles? We need to know if the window is consistent or if it drifts. Also, what is the current population count on your second continent? We're rerouting 2 of our medical ships. She paused. In the background of the transmission, I could hear sounds. Voices, quick and overlapping. Something that might have been laughter, brief and tightly controlled. The hum of systems running at high capacity. You did the right thing calling us, she said. We'll be there in 13 hours. 13 hours? She had revised the estimate down. I went to find Counselor Drevathi. He was standing at the edge of the council chamber's observation window, watching the sky. The polar light had spread. What had begun as a shimmer at the extreme edges of the atmosphere was now a broad, silent ribbon of interference, pale and cold, moving in patterns that did not match any natural phenomenon I had ever seen. The star was talking to us in the only language it had left. Something was wrong with it, deep and structural, and it was telling us so. They asked about our second continent, I said. They are routing medical ships. Drevathi did not look away from the sky. They are planning to handle casualties. Yes, they are planning before the engagement. They are not assuming a clean outcome. No, they are planning for the realistic one. He was quiet for a moment. That is not arrogance, he said finally. That is competence. There is a difference. I had thought about that distinction before. Arrogance assumes a good outcome. Competence prepares for a range of them, including the painful ones, and moves forward anyway. Most of what I had read about humans in the past 18 hours had suggested they understood this difference very clearly. Their history was full of moments that had not gone well. Their history was also full of moments where they had rebuilt from those failures and tried again, and again, and again. There was a human phrase I had found in a cultural archive. It translated roughly as, "We do not stop." It was not a boast. It was simply a description. 7 hours before the fleet's expected arrival, a third transmission came in. This one was not from Admiral Osei. It was from a young human man whose voice had the particular quality of someone who had been awake for a very long time and was choosing to treat exhaustion as a minor obstacle rather than a real one. Hey, this is Lieutenant Calvin Webb, Fleet Engineering, calling for whoever is managing Thekori infrastructure coordination. We've been looking at your atmospheric shielding grid, and we think there's a way to boost its output by about 12% using your existing emitters. We'd need your engineering team to make 3 modifications. I'm sending the instructions now. They're pretty straightforward. Your people should be able to implement them in about 4 hours. This would give your surface population a little more protection during the engagement. Let me know if you have questions. The instructions arrived. I forwarded them to our engineering division. Our chief infrastructure engineer, a methodical and thorough person named Veth Kel, looked at the instructions, and then looked at me, and then looked back at the instructions. These are very clever, she said, in a tone that sounded like she had not expected to say that. How did they know we could use our emitters this way? We did not know we could use our emitters this way. I think they looked at our schematics, I said. We included them in the data packet. Veth Kale was quiet for a moment. They read our entire infrastructure file in 18 hours and found an improvement we had missed. Apparently so. She shook her head slowly and went to implement the modifications. I returned to the communications chamber and replied to Lieutenant Webb. I told him we were implementing the modifications. I also told him, because it seemed relevant, that we were grateful. I had not said that word yet, in any of my transmissions. Grateful. It felt large and slightly awkward, the way important words sometimes do when you say them for the first time and realize they do not fully cover what you mean. His reply came back in less than 20 minutes. Good. That's good. We'll see you in 7 hours. Get some rest if you can. Things are going to move fast when we arrive. Get some rest. I had not slept in 36 hours. I did not sleep now either, but I appreciated the suggestion. There was something very human about it, something that acknowledged that the body had limits even when the situation did not. 6 hours before arrival, I received one more message. This one was short, 4 sentences. Admiral Osei's voice, quieter than before, as if she was speaking from a smaller space. I've been reading about your planet, Velsar. The libraries, the council traditions, the way your cities are built to face the sunrise. Your people have been here for 11,000 years. We have been in space for 300. You reached out to us when everyone else turned away. We will not forget that. We will see you soon. I held the recording for a long time after it finished. Outside, the sky was burning at the edges. The star was shifting. The clocks on every screen in the building were counting down in 2 directions at once, toward catastrophe and toward the humans. I chose to watch the direction of the humans. They appeared on our long-range sensors exactly 29 minutes ahead of schedule. I was in the communications chamber when the alert sounded, a low, resonant tone that I had programmed to signal any new contact in our outer detection grid. I pulled up the sensor feed and went completely still. The display was supposed to show me individual contacts. It showed me a mass of them. The system's identification protocol was running fast, tagging each contact as it resolved from background noise, and the numbers on the right side of the screen were climbing steadily. 10 contacts, 20, 31, 48. I called up to the council chamber. You should come down here, I said, and something in my voice must have been sufficiently unusual, because Councillor Drevathi arrived within 90 seconds, which was the fastest I had ever seen him move. He looked at the sensor display for a long time. His expression went through several distinct stages before settling on something that resembled awe, though in an older and more tired form than the awe of someone seeing something wonderful. It was the awe of someone who had spent a long time not believing something was possible, and had just been corrected. How many? He asked. 62 confirmed contacts, I said. The system is still resolving. By the time the fleet fully materialized within our detection range, the count was at 74. 74 vessels of varying size, coming in at a speed that was, by itself, impressive. They were decelerating now, but the approach velocity they had shed in the last 6 hours suggested they had been pushing their drives beyond standard operational limits. Not recklessly, calculatedly. They had pushed exactly as hard as the systems could tolerate, shed exactly enough speed to arrive in formation rather than scattered, and were now arranging themselves in the space above our planet, with a precision that was almost unsettling to watch on a sensor screen. Not all the ships were warships. That was the first thing that struck me as I began running identification queries against our human vessel registry, which was 11 years out of date but still contained enough silhouette and mass data to be partially useful. I recognized several hull types that matched civilian transport classifications. There was one vessel, massive and slow, that matched the profile of an asteroid processing barge, the kind of ship that mines raw materials from uninhabited rock bodies. Its sensor return suggested that it was carrying an unusual amount of mass that did not match the composition of typical mining cargo. There was also, unmistakably, 2 vessels that matched the profile of medical frigates. Lieutenant Webb had told me they were coming. I had believed him. Seeing them there still created a sensation in my chest that I could not immediately name. Admiral Osei opened a channel before I had finished my analysis. Velsar. Her voice was the same as before. Calm, present, the calmness of decision rather than nature. We're in position. I want to give you a brief overview of what we're going to do before we do it, so your council can monitor, and so you can keep your people informed. Can you record this? I am always recording, I said. She made a sound that might have been a brief laugh. Good. Here is the situation. The Vorkai weapon has a structural vulnerability. Your analyst identified it, and we confirmed it with our own calculations. There is a resonance window every 47 minutes, where a precisely timed counterpulse can interrupt the disruption cycle. We are going to hit that window. That will not destroy the weapon, but it will halt the accumulating damage to your star's magnetic field. Your sun needs time to stabilize on its own after the disruption cycle is interrupted. Our stellar scientists estimate 8 to 12 hours, assuming we can hold the suppression pattern. That means we need to keep the Vorkai occupied for 8 to 12 hours, while our pulse ships maintain the suppression cycle. And the Vorkai fleet, I said. They will not simply allow this. No, said Osei. They will not. The Vorkai have 6 warships in this system. We have identified all of them. We are not going to engage them directly, unless they engage us first. We are going to make ourselves very inconvenient to deal with, in a very specific way, and we are going to maintain that position for as long as we need to. She paused. There is one thing I want to be transparent with you about. This is not a guaranteed outcome. We have done everything we can to calculate for every scenario we can imagine, and we are very good at imagining scenarios. But the Vorkai may do something we have not anticipated. If that happens, we adapt. That is what we do. I want you to know that going in, because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve reassurance. I thought about that for a moment. Counselor Drevathi is standing beside me, I said. He would like me to tell you that he appreciates the honesty and finds it considerably more reassuring than reassurance would have been. Drevathi, who had not said anything of the kind, made a small sound of surprise. Then he paused and slowly nodded his head, as if deciding that it was actually true. Tell him thank you, said Osei. We will check in every 30 minutes. If you see anything on your sensors that concerns you, call immediately. There are no small concerns today. The channel closed. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The Vorkai fleet was on the far side of the system, near the weapon installation they had positioned in a stable orbit around our star. Whether they had detected the human fleet yet was unclear. Our sensor range was limited, and the disruption from the Lance's repeated firing had been interfering with long-range readings for over a day. Then Lieutenant Webb's voice appeared on a secondary channel. Hey, Velsar, quick update from engineering. We've deployed the pulse array. 4 ships in formation, holding position relative to your star. We're going to start the suppression pattern now, so we have it calibrated before things get complicated. You should see a change in the Lance's pulse intensity within the next firing cycle. Let us know if your sensors pick it up. I watched the display. The stellar disruption Lance was scheduled to fire again in approximately 18 minutes, based on the cycle data I had been tracking. I set a timer and watched the sensor feed with the focused attention of someone who has been told that something important is about to happen, but has no control over whether it does. 14 minutes after Webb's message, the Vorkai weapon fired. The pulse hit our star's magnetic field. On our monitoring screens, the disruption reading spiked in the usual pattern. And then, 4 seconds into the cycle, something changed. The reading did not continue its upward climb. It stuttered. It compressed. It held at a level that was, according to every number on my screen, significantly lower than any previous firing had produced. I see it, I said, to no one in particular. From somewhere above me, Counselor Drevathi let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for 47 hours. Confirmed suppression, said Webb's voice, steady and professional, with just enough warmth underneath to be human. Pattern is holding. We'll maintain this through the next cycle. Admiral, the array is hot. Understood, said Osei. All ships, we are live. The Vorkai had noticed. The human fleet's arrivals would have been impossible to miss, even without the pulse suppression, and the suppression itself would have shown up immediately on any decent sensor array. The Vorkai commander's response came through on the open diplomatic channel, which both species shared and which I was now monitoring continuously. The Vorkai used a translation protocol that our systems had on file, and his words came through in standard galactic common with only a slight delay. He told the humans that they were not part of this conflict. He told them that the Thekori matter was a regional issue. He used the phrase sovereign action, which was how the Vorkai Dominion described most of what they did that other species found objectionable. Admiral Osei's response was 14 words. 14 words, delivered without heat, without performance, in the same calm voice she used for everything. The people on that planet called for help. We are giving it. We are done talking. She closed the channel. I noticed that she did not argue the point. She did not debate sovereignty or legal frameworks or the history of the Thekori-Vorkai dispute. She simply stated what she was doing and why, and then stopped transmitting. There was something in that economy of words that told me more about humans than anything I had read in the archive. They were not here to convince the Vorkai of anything. They were not seeking agreement or validation. They had formed a view of the situation, and the view was, someone needs help, we can give it. We are giving it. Everything else was noise. The Vorkai fleet began to move. 6 warships, much larger than most of the human fleet, well armed and operating in their own territory with supply lines and tactical familiarity that the humans could not match. They came in fast and aggressive, the way the Vorkai always moved in military situations, with the confidence of a force that had never lost a significant engagement in recent memory. What happened next took me a long time to fully describe in my records, because it was very fast, and I was watching through a sensor display, not a visual feed. And sensor data is numbers and readings and symbols rather than images. I will try to describe what the numbers told me. The human fleet did not form a defensive wall. It did not consolidate into a cluster. It spread. Each ship moved to a different vector, and the vectors were not random. They were part of a pattern that I could not identify as a pattern until 3 moves in, because the pattern was built around the Vorkai fleet's expected responses, rather than around any fixed geometry. The humans were not holding a position. They were shaping the Vorkai's options, herding the larger ships toward particular corridors of space by making certain directions less attractive. The Vorkai fired on 3 human ships. 2 of those ships moved before the shots arrived. The third took a hit that, based on the energy readings, should have been devastating. The ship's shields absorbed more of it than our analysis suggested possible, and the remaining damage was to non-critical systems. I later learned that this was not luck. The human crew had identified which of their systems were least critical to mission success, and the ship's captain had positioned his vessel so that if a hit was coming, it was most likely to hit those systems. They had decided in advance what they were willing to lose. The mining barge, which I had identified, and then largely set aside in my attention as a non-combat vessel, did something unexpected. It released its cargo. Not mining material, rock. An enormous piece of shaped rock, roughly ovoid, perhaps 400 meters across. It had been in the barge's cargo hold, and now it was not, and it was moving on a very precise trajectory that our tracking system immediately flagged as significant, because the trajectory intersected with the path the Vorkai flagship was currently taking. The Vorkai flagship changed course. In doing so, it moved exactly where the human formation had left a gap that was not, it turned out, actually empty. 3 human vessels that had been running quietly on minimal power output came to full active status simultaneously. They were perfectly positioned. The Vorkai flagship's new course had walked it directly between them. I did not fully understand what happened in the next 40 seconds. I do not think anyone outside the human fleet fully understood it in real time. What the sensors showed me was a rapid series of energy exchanges, shield readings fluctuating and recovering, positioning changes happening so fast that the tracking system struggled to keep up. What the end result showed was the Vorkai flagship running dark, not destroyed, disabled, its weapons offline, its engines at minimum, its crew presumably very shaken inside a ship that was no longer a threat. The mining barge had already redirected its recovery systems to collect the rock it had released, returning it to cargo, as if it had always planned to do exactly this, and would like its equipment back now, please. The 5 remaining Vorkai warships did not retreat. I had half expected them to, after watching their flagship go dark. But the Vorkai were not a species that retreated easily. What they did instead was reorganize, tighten their formation, and change tactics. They stopped trying to engage the entire human fleet at once, and instead concentrated on a single target, the 4-ship pulse array that was maintaining the suppression pattern on the stellar disruption lance. It was a logical decision. The pulse array was the thing that mattered. If they could break the suppression, the lance would resume its full damaging cycle, and our star would continue deteriorating. The human fleet's entire position depended on those 4 ships holding their pattern. Disable the pattern and everything else became irrelevant. I watched the Vorkai redirect with a cold kind of dread. I opened a channel to Admiral Osei. "They are targeting the pulse array," I said. "I know," she said. She did not sound alarmed. She sounded like someone who had planned for this specific thing. Velsar, I need you to stay on this channel for the next 2 hours. I want you to have a direct line to me. If anything changes on your end, anything at all, tell me immediately. Understood, I said. Is the array going to hold? Ask me in 2 hours. That was not the answer I had wanted. It was, I was learning. The kind of answer humans gave when they were being honest. She did not know. She had a plan, but plans existed in a world that had not happened yet, and the world that had not happened yet did not always match the world that had been planned for. What I could see on my sensor display was this. The Vorkai had committed 3 of their 5 remaining ships to a coordinated run at the pulse array. The other 2 were maintaining pressure on the broader human fleet, preventing the other ships from freely maneuvering to reinforce. It was a disciplined, intelligent tactic. The Vorkai were, whatever else could be said about them, experienced fighters. Admiral Osei's response was immediate and, to me, initially confusing. She pulled 12 ships out of the main fleet formation. Not to reinforce the pulse array, away from it. She sent them in an entirely different direction, curving wide around the system's inner planets, out of the direct engagement zone, on a heading that seemed to lead nowhere significant. The Vorkai ignored them. And that, I realized, watching the numbers on my screen change, was the point. I pulled up the system chart and stared at the trajectory she had given those 12 ships. I traced it out. I extended the projection. I looked at where they would be in 40 minutes if they maintained their current heading. They would be directly behind the Vorkai formation. Not close, not immediately threatening, but in a position where, if the Vorkai wanted to continue their focused attack on the pulse array, they would need to ignore 12 armed vessels at their backs, and if the Vorkai split their attention to deal with those 12 ships, they would have to break off the attack on the array to do it. It was not a tactic of force. It was a tactic of geometry, of making the enemy's position uncomfortable in a way that had nothing to do with who was stronger, and everything to do with who was thinking further ahead. For the next 20 minutes, the engagement was brutal, in a way that the sensor data could only partially convey. The 3 Vorkai ships attacking the pulse array were committed and precise. 2 of the 4 human ships in the array took significant damage. One of them, a vessel called the Caro, lost its forward shields entirely, and had to adjust its position within the pattern to compensate. The adjustment worked, because Lieutenant Webb's voice appeared on the channel, and told me in a tone of concentrated effort that the suppression pattern was still holding, but that he would really appreciate it if the next 47 minutes went slightly better than the last 47. The lance fired again. The suppression pattern held. The damage to the Caro was significant enough that I could read it on the sensor display without needing detailed reports. The ship was holding its position, but it was doing so while partially impaired, which meant that the crew inside it was working harder than any crew should have to work to maintain a precise technical operation, while their ship absorbed punishment. I opened a channel directly to the Caro. I was not sure why. There was nothing I could do to help them. I was a scribe, in a communications chamber, on a planet with a damaged star, but I opened the channel because the alternative was to sit in silence watching someone else hold the line for us, and that felt wrong in a way I could not fully articulate. A voice answered, male, young, tight with focus but not with fear. This is Ensign Danny Harrow, Caro Engineering. Who is this? This is Velsar. I am the Thekori Council's communications officer. I am monitoring from the surface. A pause. Then, oh, right, hey. Are you holding? Yeah, we're holding. Forward shields are gone, but the hull is intact, and the pulse emitter is still calibrated. We had to move about 3 degrees off our original position, but Webb says the pattern is compensating. Another pause. Listen, we've got a lot going on up here. Is there something you needed? No, I said. I simply wanted to know how you were. A longer pause this time. When Ensign Harrow spoke again, his voice was slightly different. Still tight, still focused, but something in it had shifted. We're good, he said. We're going to hold this. Tell your people down there to stay calm. We've got it. He closed the channel. I sat with that for a moment. We've got it, said by a young man on a damaged ship, maintaining a technical pattern under fire, in someone else's solar system, for people he had never met and had no obligation to risk his life for. We've got it. The 12 ships that Osei had sent on the wide arc arrived at their position behind the Vorkai formation at the 43-minute mark. As I had projected, they did not attack. They simply held position. Present. Visible. A problem that did not yet need to be dealt with, but that could not be ignored. The Vorkai commander opened a channel to his attacking ships. Our systems captured the transmission, and the translation came through a few seconds later. He was ordering 2 of his 3 attacking ships to peel off and address the 12 vessels now at his back. The attack on the pulse array dropped from 3 ships to 1. The single remaining Vorkai ship continued its assault with the determination of a force that understood. It was now badly disadvantaged but was not willing to admit it in any language the sensor data could measure. It fired repeatedly and with precision. And the pulse array's remaining ships held their positions and took what came, and continued to maintain the suppression pattern. The lance fired for the 3rd time since the humans arrived. The suppression held. Something changed in the star. I noticed it in the monitoring data before the alert systems flagged it. The magnetic field readings, which had been trending in only one direction for 41 hours, had flattened. They were no longer deteriorating. They were not improving yet. But for the first time since the crisis began, they were not getting worse. I sent a message to Osei. The stellar monitoring data has stabilized. Your suppression pattern is working. Her reply came back in seconds. How stable? Flat. No improvement yet, but no further degradation. Your scientists said 8 to 12 hours to full recovery once the disruption cycle was interrupted. We are approximately 40 minutes into that window. Understood. 7 hours and 20 minutes to go. Webb, you hearing this? Webb's voice. Heard. We're good. Caro's hanging in there. Somebody bring me coffee when this is over. You'll get coffee when it's over, said Osei. Maybe even the good stuff. I did not know what the good stuff meant in terms of their beverage, but the exchange told me something about the atmosphere on those ships. They were afraid. They were working very hard. They were also, somehow, still themselves, still maintaining the ordinary warmth of people who knew each other well, which was its own kind of discipline, a refusal to let the weight of the situation flatten them into pure function. In the hours that followed, I experienced time in a way that I can only describe as layered. Each individual minute felt very long. Each segment of 30 minutes felt very short. The combat continued, evolving, shifting, the Vorkai trying different approaches, and the human fleet adjusting each time, with a flexibility that suggested central command and individual initiative working together in a way that I could not quite understand from the outside. At one point, 3 human ships maneuvered into a configuration that I initially read as defensive. Then I looked more carefully and realized it was actually a kind of bait. They were holding a position that looked weak but was not, and 2 of the Vorkai ships moved to exploit what they thought was an opening, only to find themselves flanked by ships that had been running quiet on opposite sides. The engagement was brief and decisive, and when it was over, 1 Vorkai ship was adrift, and another was retreating under limited power. 3 Vorkai ships remained. 2 of them maintained a harassment pattern against the human fleet. The third, the most persistent, continued its solo assault on the pulse array with a stubbornness that was almost admirable. The Caro's forward hull eventually developed a fracture along its secondary seam. Ensign Harrow sent me an update, unprompted, at the 6-hour mark. Hull integrity at 71%. Emitter is still calibrated. We're good, Velsar. I had not asked. He simply sent it. I added it to my records and tried to understand why something that small made it so difficult to maintain the professional distance that a scribe was supposed to maintain. This was their job. They had signed up for this, whatever signed up meant in human culture, and they were doing it. But they were doing it for us, for people they did not know, for a species that had, until 47 hours ago, been mostly a footnote in their galactic awareness. Because someone called, and they answered. At the 7-hour mark, the stellar monitoring data shifted again. The magnetic field readings began to move, not flat anymore, moving in the right direction. Upward, slowly, in the tentative way of something that has been injured and is beginning to assess whether the danger has passed. Admiral Osei, I said, my voice coming out not entirely steady. The star is recovering. A brief silence on the channel. Then, from somewhere in the fleet, a sound that I recognized from my human archive reading as cheering, not from OC's ship, from someone else, on another vessel, picked up by the open channel. Someone had been monitoring the Thekori stellar data, and had heard what I said before the Admiral had a chance to respond, and they had expressed exactly what they felt about it, loudly and without restraint. Ose let the sound go for a few seconds. Then, all right, let's stay focused. We've got an hour to go minimum. Webb, how is the array? Still holding. Caro is at 68% hull, but the emitter is locked in. We're good. Good. Everyone hold positions. We are not done yet. We were not done yet, but the star was recovering. That fact was large enough and solid enough that I held on to it through the final hour, through the continued pressure on the array, through 2 more firing cycles and 2 more successful suppressions, through the long, grinding work of people pushing systems and bodies beyond the comfortable range, choosing to hold their positions because leaving was not something they were going to do. The Vorkai withdrew at the 9-hour mark. Not all at once, and not gracefully. The 2 ships maintaining the harassment pattern broke off first, moving to a holding distance that was still technically within the system, but no longer within engagement range. The persistent ship targeting the pulse array held its position for another 40 minutes, firing with diminishing frequency as its own reserves depleted, before it too finally pulled back. The remaining Vorkai ships, including the disabled flagship, which had drifted into a new position under minimal maneuvering power, clustered at the system's edge. 3 functioning vessels, and the silent, dark bulk of their flagship, sitting very still, in a way that communicated, even without words, that the equation had changed and they knew it. Admiral Ose did not pursue them. She did not fire on them as they withdrew. She did not broadcast any declaration of victory or send any message to the Vorkai commander. She simply held her fleet in position and let them go, and then, after the retreat was confirmed, and the pulse array had completed 2 more successful suppression cycles, she opened the Vorkai commander's channel and sent a single file, their own sensor data, a complete recording of everything their fleet had done, and everything the humans had done in response, compressed into a small package and transmitted without comment. She was telling them, "We have this. We want you to know that we have this, not to humiliate you. Simply to be clear." I asked her about it later, and that was how she explained it. If they understand clearly what happened here, they are less likely to try it again. Not because they are afraid of losing necessarily, because they will understand that this is what they would have to deal with. And that is a more durable deterrent than anything else I could send them. She paused. Also, if they report back accurately to their leadership, and their leadership is rational, which I have some reason to believe they are, this gives everyone a way to de-escalate. They can call it a tactical withdrawal. They have grounds to open a different kind of conversation with your council. Nothing gets solved today that doesn't need to be solved today. Just this thing. Just this crisis. I thought about that philosophy for a long time. The idea of leaving your opponent a way to understand what happened without needing to be humiliated by it. The idea of fighting fiercely, and then stepping back and making space for something else to happen. It was not how most species I knew of approached conflict. It was also, I suspected, part of why the humans had been in space for 300 years without being destroyed by any of the powerful and occasionally hostile civilizations they had encountered. They were not naive. They were not gentle about the fighting itself, when the fighting had to happen, but they seemed to understand, with a clarity that felt almost instinctive, that the goal was never the fight. The goal was what came after. The Caro was the first ship to request assistance. The hull fracture had stabilized during the engagement, but needed immediate repair before the crew could safely maintain their current orbit. One of the human medical frigates moved in alongside, and 2 engineering teams crossed in suits to assess the external damage. I watched the operation on my sensor display and thought about Ensign Danny Harrow inside that ship, who had sent me voluntary updates for 9 hours, who had told me at the 6-hour mark that they were good and meant it. I sent him a message. The stellar monitoring data shows full trajectory to recovery. Your pulse array saved our star. His reply came back after a short delay that I attributed to him being busy with post-engagement tasks. That's really good to hear. How are your people doing down there? Down there. He was asking about the surface population. about the people under the atmospheric shielding who had spent 9 hours not knowing whether the sky was about to collapse on them. They are shaken, I told him, but they are whole. You gave them that. A longer pause. We gave it together, he said. You sent the signal. That's not nothing, Velsar. That took some nerve. I did not have a reply for that immediately, and by the time I had composed one, he had signed off to attend to the Caro's repairs. I saved his message in my personal archive alongside everything else I was collecting. It was, I thought, a thing worth keeping. The full recovery of our star's magnetic field was declared at the 14-hour mark after the suppression array had first fired. The number was toward the longer end of the scientists' estimate, 8 to 12 hours, a detail I would not have thought to question in the past but which now seemed relevant in ways it had not before. The humans had committed to protecting us for up to 12 hours without certainty. Not 8, 12. They had built their plan around the harder number. That evening, which felt like a strange and fragile word for the period of time that followed a day like that one, I went outside. I stood in the public courtyard outside the council building and looked up. The sky had changed. The polar interference light was gone. The strange pale ribbons that had been moving against the stars for over 2 days had faded, leaving the sky looking almost normal, except that I could not look at it normally anymore. I knew what had been happening behind that sky. I knew what had stopped it. Above me, somewhere in orbit, 74 human ships were doing the ordinary work of post-engagement maintenance, repairing systems, documenting damage, rotating crew for rest, doing the 1,000 practical things that follow an intense operation. The Caro was being patched. Lieutenant Webb had presumably received his coffee. Ensign Harrow was probably eating something. They were alive. So were we. I tried to calculate how many of my people would not have been alive in 4 days' time if the signal had not gone out, and if the humans had not answered it. I arrived at a number that was too large to hold in my mind, without it affecting me in a way that I could not allow to affect me in a public courtyard, where other people were also coming out to look at the sky. So I stopped the calculation and simply stood there instead and looked up. The formal meeting between the Thekori Council and Admiral Osei was held 2 days later aboard our orbital transfer station. It was the first time I had met her in person, and I had been picturing her for 2 days based only on a voice. The voice had suggested someone tall, I thought, and forceful in some visible physical way. She was not particularly tall. She was a compact woman of middle age with close-cropped gray-streaked hair and an unhurried way of moving that reminded me of the way our most experienced engineers moved around complex machinery. Familiar, confident not in a loud way but in the way of someone who has learned, through long practice, exactly what her hands can do. She smelled like something warm and bitter that I did not recognize until Counselor Drevathi's assistant identified it afterward as coffee. I was oddly glad it was coffee. It meant that detail of the transmission recording had been accurate. There was something grounding about that. The Council had prepared an extensive document of proposed agreements, technology exchanges, navigational access, trade protocols, and formal recognition of the human fleet as allied defense partners, a proposed annual tribute structure. The document was 83 pages long. Our diplomatic team had worked through the night on it. It represented, in the Thekori tradition, the appropriate way to acknowledge a debt. Admiral Osei listened to Counselor Lethvar read the summary for approximately 6 minutes. Then she held up one hand, gently, and said, "We appreciate this, genuinely, but we are not going to take most of it." Lethvar stopped reading. "I beg your pardon? We don't want a formal defense alliance that obligates you politically. We don't want tribute. We don't want technology transfers that you might need for your own development." She paused. "What we would like, if you're willing, is navigational access for humanitarian operations, safe harbor for our medical vessels in your space, and a reciprocal arrangement for any of your ships in ours. And we would like a standing open communication channel, so that if a situation like this develops again, the message gets to us without having to go through open band frequencies." Lethvar looked at his 83-page document, and then back at Admiral Osei. "That is all?" "There is one more thing," she said. She looked at me, directly, which was the first time she had made eye contact with me since entering the room, and I understood that she had noticed me from the beginning, and had been choosing her moment. "We would like your council's official record of what happened here. Velsar's account specifically. We have reviewed the monitoring logs and the transmission records, and she captured it more accurately than anything our own documentation will produce, because she was watching from the outside. Why? Drevathi asked, before I could. Osei was quiet for a moment. When she answered, her voice was the same as it was in every transmission, calm, present, certain without being loud about it. Because humans have been in space for 300 years, she said, and in most of the rest of the galaxy, that reads as young, primitive, dangerous, unpredictable. We are aware of that reputation. We are aware of how other civilizations have classified us. And we think that what happened in this system, over these last 4 days, is a better description of what we actually are than any classification file. She folded her hands on the table. Your account will be believed in a way that ours would not. You are the Thekori Council. You have been here for 11,000 years. When you say what you saw, people will listen. The council chamber was quiet. I thought about the signal I had encoded in the communications chamber, the one I had sent without expecting an answer. I thought about the 14 minutes it had taken for a response to arrive. I thought about 74 ships materializing on our sensors, including a mining barge and 2 medical frigates, and a young ensign named Danny Harrow, who had sent me voluntary updates for 9 hours from a damaged ship, because he thought I should know how they were doing. What do you want people to understand? I asked, when they read it. Osei looked at me steadily. That we came because you asked, she said. That is the whole thing. That is all of it. Someone in distress sent a signal into the dark, not even certain anyone would hear it. And we heard it, and we came. We are not claiming to be the most powerful species in this galaxy. We are not claiming to be the most advanced, or the most sophisticated, or the most anything. We are claiming this. If you call, and we can hear you, we will come. She paused. We want the rest of the galaxy to know that. Not because we want them to be impressed by us. Because we want them to know that the option exists. That there is a species out here that will answer that kind of call. That whoever you are, and wherever you are, if things go wrong and you reach out, someone will answer. I wrote down every word she said. I am, after all, a scribe, and scribes record everything. I have been writing this account for 6 weeks now. I have written it carefully, the way Velsar the scribe tries to write everything carefully, with attention to what I actually observed rather than what I expected to observe, and with honesty about the places where I was wrong. I was wrong about humans. I had the data. I had the historical records and the xenological assessments and the cultural analyses. I had a complete picture of their capabilities and a reasonable projection of their limitations, and from all of that I had constructed an image of a species that was interesting, but not yet significant. Young, rough around the edges, capable of great things in 50 years perhaps, not a factor today. I was wrong. What I had missed, in all the data, was the thing the data could not capture, the thing that made Ensign Harrow send me updates from a damaged ship, the thing that made Admiral Osei mute a hostile transmission without bothering to respond, the thing that brought a mining barge to a military engagement, because a mining barge captain had heard there was a need, and had asked, apparently, what they could do to help. Humans are not fearless. I have read enough of their literature now to know that. They experience fear the same way any thinking species does, the sharp recognition that the situation is dangerous, and the body's urgent message that the safest direction is away. They feel that. They simply seem to have made a collective, and I think largely unspoken, agreement about what comes after the fear. The agreement is that the fear is not the deciding vote. The agreement is that what matters more than the fear is the person on the other side of it who needs something. The agreement is that if you can help, you help, and you work out the rest afterward. Admiral Osei said they do not want to be called powerful. They do not want to be called advanced. Perhaps that is the right way to think about it. Perhaps the words we usually apply to civilizations that command respect, power, advancement, sophistication, are simply not the right words for what makes humans worth knowing. The right word, I think, is reliable. In a galaxy where treaties dissolve under political pressure, and aid is conditional on strategic benefit, and no one answers a distress signal from a primitive species on the open band frequencies, humans are the species that showed up. That is what they want to be known for. That is what I am recording. If you call, and they can hear you, they will come. I believe them. I have evidence.